My stepson saw my panty and got rock hard. What would you do if one accidental moment unleashed a wave of tension that threatens your family's fragile balance? In this story, a stepmother finds herself navigating an emotionally charged situation that forces her to confront boundaries, guilt, and the delicate threads holding her blended family together. Can she repair the damage before it's too late? Or will everything fall apart? Stick around to uncover this deeply personal and gripping tale. Don't forget to subscribe and share where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. I was folding the laundry in the living room, trying to ignore the hum of the TV that my stepson Ryan had left on earlier. My husband was away on another of his endless business trips, and the house felt emptier than usual. As I stacked the neatly folded clothes into piles, a small, lacy piece slipped from my hands and landed on the floor. A delicate burgundy thong that I'd worn only once, that kept at the bottom of my drawer. I reached down quickly, hoping to tuck it away before anyone could notice. Hey, do you know where the remote is? Ryan's voice startled me, and I jerked upright, clutching the thong. Ah. He stood in the doorway, tall and lanky, his dark eyes fixated on the small piece of fabric in my hand. My face heated instantly as I shoved it into the laundry basket. "Ryan, you scared me," I said, forcing a laugh that sounded hollow even to my own ears. "Sorry," he said, but his gaze lingered a beat too long. His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed, and I realized with growing discomfort that his cheeks had turned crimson. He quickly averted his eyes, looking anywhere but at me, but the moment stretched unbearably long. I cleared my throat, desperate to break the tension. "The remote? It's probably under the couch cushions. You always leave it there." He nodded stiffly, muttering, "Yeah, right, thanks," before walking into the living room, avoiding eye contact. My heart raced as I tried to continue folding clothes, but my hands trembled. The image of his flushed face and his wide-eyed reaction was seared into my mind. I told myself it was nothing, a fleeting teenage awkwardness. But the unsettling sensation in my gut told me otherwise. The rest of the evening was tense, though I tried to act as though nothing had happened. Ryan had found the remote and settled into the couch, his face fixed on the TV, but I couldn't shake the awkwardness that hung in the air. I kept busy in the kitchen, washing dishes that didn't really need washing, my mind replaying the moment over and over. What was I overthinking? He was a teenager, 17, on the cusp of adulthood, struggling to understand his emotions. It was natural for boys his age to feel confused, wasn't it? But the way he looked at me, the way he froze, it felt different. Too different. Ryan had been living with me and his father, my husband Mark, for almost 5 years. When Mark and I married, Ryan was just a boy, shy and reserved. We didn't bond immediately, but I'd worked hard to build a relationship with him, always encouraging him, being present when he needed a supportive ear. I'd hoped to become a maternal figure in his life, but as he got older, our relationship became more formal, more distant. Recently, though, his behavior had changed. He lingered in rooms longer than necessary, found excuses to start conversations that felt forced, and, more than once, I'd caught him staring at me with an intensity that left me unsettled. I brushed it off as a phase, a side effect of adolescence and his father's frequent absences. But tonight, with the Thong incident, everything shifted. As I cleaned the counter for the 3rd time, Ryan's voice startled me again. "Dinner was good tonight, thanks." He leaned on the kitchen doorway, his hands stuffed into his jeans pockets. "Ooh, thanks, Ryan," I said, keeping my tone light. It was just leftovers, nothing special. He didn't respond, just stood there, as though searching for the right words. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and glanced at him. Everything okay? Yeah, everything's fine, he said quickly, his voice higher pitched than usual. His eyes darted around the kitchen before landing back on me. I was just wondering, never mind. I tilted my head, trying to gauge his expression, but he looked away too quickly. If something's bothering you, you can tell me, I offered. No, it's nothing, he muttered, retreating down the hall toward his room. I sighed and sat down at the kitchen table, staring at the half-empty glass of wine I'd poured earlier. Mark's work trips had become longer and more frequent, leaving me alone to navigate the challenges of parenting a teenage boy who wasn't really mine. It wasn't just about laundry mishaps or awkward conversations. It was about trying to maintain boundaries in a household where those lines often blurred. Mark and I had been married for 6 years, and while I loved him dearly, his absence was beginning to take its toll. He worked hard to provide for us, but his dedication to his career left little time for connection, either with me or Ryan. I knew Ryan felt the same distance. It wasn't uncommon for him to complain about his dad missing his soccer games or skipping dinners. I'd stepped in as much as I could, but I wasn't his mother. I couldn't fill that void. The next morning, I tried to shake off the lingering unease. Ryan was already at the table, scrolling through his phone as he ate cereal. Morning, I said, forcing a cheerful tone. Morning, he mumbled, not looking up. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat across from him, pretending to read emails on my phone. The air was heavy with unspoken tension, and I hated it. I wanted to say something, anything, to ease the awkwardness, but I didn't know where to start. Are you going to that movie with your friends tonight? I asked, breaking the silence. No, plans changed, he said, glancing at me briefly before returning to his phone. Probably just gonna hang out here. Okay, I said, keeping my voice casual. Maybe we could order pizza or something. Sure, he replied, his tone neutral, but his ears were red, a telltale sign that he was uncomfortable. The rest of the day passed uneventfully, but the unease remained. That night, as I sat in bed scrolling mindlessly through social media, Mark called. His voice crackled over the speakerphone. Hey, hun, how's everything? Fine, I said, trying not to let my frustration seep into my voice. Ryan's here. We had pizza. How's he doing? Mark asked, but it felt like an obligatory question rather than genuine concern. He's fine, I said. You know, I think he misses you. Maybe when you're back, you two could spend some time together. Yeah, sure, he said, but his tone was distracted. Listen, I have to go. Early meeting tomorrow. Love you. Love you too, I said, but the call had already ended. I stared at the phone for a long moment before setting it on the nightstand. Mark's absence loomed larger than ever, and I couldn't help but feel like I was left to hold the family together while he chased promotions and pay raises. I knew he meant well, but his priorities left me feeling isolated. As I turned off the light, I couldn't stop my mind from wandering back to Ryan. His behavior wasn't his fault. He was just a kid navigating a confusing time in his life. But I couldn't ignore the growing discomfort between us, and I knew something had to change. The following days felt like I was walking on eggshells. Ryan's behavior oscillated between normal teenage aloofness and moments of peculiar intensity that left me questioning everything. I told myself it was all in my head, but the memory of that awkward encounter lingered like an unwanted shadow. It meant by far the worst part. One afternoon, while I was vacuuming the living room, I heard Ryan's door open. He shuffled into the hallway and stood there, watching me. "Do you need something, Ryan?" I asked, pausing the vacuum and turning to face him. He hesitated, scratching the back of his neck. No, just I was going to grab a drink." I gestured toward the kitchen. "Well, it's all yours." But he didn't move right away. Instead, his eyes flickered to me, then away again. You've been cleaning a lot lately," he said, his tone oddly soft. I gave a small laugh, trying to lighten the mood. "Just trying to keep the house in order while your dad's gone." He nodded and walked past me, but as he passed, I caught a faint, nervous energy radiating from him. It wasn't just the awkwardness of adolescence. It felt more personal, more deliberate. Later that evening, the tension resurfaced when I found Ryan in the laundry room. He wasn't doing laundry. He was standing there, staring at a pile of clean clothes I'd left earlier. My heart skipped a beat as I noticed one of my camisoles draped across the top. "Ryan," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm, "what are you doing?" He jumped, as though I'd caught him stealing, and stammered, "Oh, I was just... I thought these were mine. My hoodie, I mean." His face flushed as he hastily grabbed a random shirt from the pile and clutched it to his chest. "These are my clothes," I said, stepping forward and gathering the laundry. "Your hoodies are in your room." He nodded quickly, backing away. "Yeah, sorry, my bad." He disappeared down the hall before I could say anything else. I stared at the laundry, my stomach twisting in knots. His behavior was becoming harder to dismiss. That night, as I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, I replayed the moment in my head. Was I overreacting? Was this just a teenager's clumsy attempt to navigate growing up in a house with a stepmother? I didn't know how to interpret his actions, and it left me feeling both anxious and guilty. The turning point came a few days later when we were watching TV together. It was something we used to do often, but since Mark's absence, Ryan and I had been spending less time in the same room. I decided to make an effort to bridge the growing divide, hoping it would ease the awkwardness. As we sat on opposite ends of the couch, I noticed Ryan glancing at me from the corner of his eye. At first, I pretended not to notice, focusing on the screen, but his gaze was persistent. Finally, I turned to him. "Ryan, is something wrong?" His eyes widened, and he shook his head. "No, I'm fine." "You've been acting different lately," I said gently, trying to keep my tone non-confrontational. "If something's bothering you, you can tell me." He hesitated, his hands gripping the edge of his knees. "It's nothing, really." "Ryan," I pressed, leaning forward slightly. "I'm here to help, you know that, right?" He looked at me, his expression conflicted. "It's not something you'd understand." "Try me," I said, my voice soft but insistent. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. "It's just being here with you. It's different now." My heart skipped a beat, but I kept my face neutral. "Different how?" He looked away, his face turning a deep shade of red. You're really pretty." The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. I froze, my mind racing to process what he'd just said. "Ryan," I began, searching for the right words. "I'm sorry," he blurted, his voice cracking. "I didn't mean... I don't know why I feel this way." I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. "It's okay," I said, though my pulse was pounding. "You're going through a lot of changes right now, and it's normal to feel confused." "I don't want to feel this way," he admitted, his eyes shiny with unshed tears. I feel like such a freak. You're not a freak, I said firmly, moving closer but keeping a respectful distance. Feelings can be messy and confusing, but they don't define who you are. What matters is how you handle them. He nodded, looking down at his hands. I'm sorry if I've made you uncomfortable. I wanted to say something to reassure him, to put his mind at ease, but the truth was, I wasn't sure what to say. I felt a deep pang of sympathy for him. He was just a teenager trying to make sense of his emotions, and I didn't want him to feel ashamed. At the same time, I knew I had to set clear boundaries to prevent any further misunderstandings. You must be very busy with our students, he said to me. They spend a lot of hours here. It's okay, Ryan, I said after a long pause, but we need to talk about boundaries. It's important for both of us. He nodded again, his face still red. Yeah, I get it. The rest of the evening passed quietly, but the atmosphere in the house had shifted. I knew we'd reached a pivotal moment, one that couldn't be ignored. The house was unnervingly silent the next morning. Ryan avoided me entirely, retreating to his room and only emerging for meals. I let him be, figuring he needed time to process our conversation. But by the second day, the distance was beginning to gnaw at me. This was no longer just a phase or a fleeting awkwardness. It was a wedge driven deep into the fragile dynamic of our family. Late that evening, after I had finished folding another round of laundry, I decided to talk to him. Leaving the folded towels on the counter, I walked to his room and knocked softly. Ryan? Can we talk for a minute? I heard a shuffle and a quiet, yeah, come in. I pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit room. He was sitting on his bed, his laptop balanced on his knees. His face was pale, and he didn't look up as I entered. My heart stopped as I entered. I know things have been weird between us, I began, sitting on the chair at his desk, leaving a comfortable distance between us. I just want to make sure you're okay. He closed his laptop and set it aside, his fingers fidgeting with the hem of his hoodie. I'm fine, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. You don't seem fine, I pressed gently. You've been keeping to yourself, and it's not like you. He sighed, running a hand through his hair. I don't know how to act around you anymore. I feel like I ruined everything. You didn't ruin anything, I assured him, but we need to talk about what's been happening. It's not something we can just ignore. He finally looked at me, his eyes filled with shame. I don't know what's wrong with me. I know I shouldn't. I mean, you're my stepmom. It's just, sometimes I don't know how to control what I'm feeling. His voice cracked, and I could see how much this was tearing him apart. I took a deep breath, choosing my words carefully. Ryan, feelings are complicated. Sometimes they come out of nowhere and they don't always make sense. But what matters is how we handle them. And I think we need to set some boundaries to make things easier for both of us. He nodded, his face turning red again. I don't want you to hate me. I could never hate you, I said firmly. You're a part of this family, and I care about you, but it's important that we respect each other's space and boundaries. That's how we keep things healthy. He swallowed hard, his voice barely audible. It's just hard. You're so amazing, and I don't know how to stop feeling this way. His words hit me like a punch to the gut, but I refused to let my composure slip. Ryan, I understand this is confusing for you, but these feelings will pass. You're growing, and your emotions are heightened right now. It's normal to feel things you don't understand, but it doesn't mean you're a bad person. He looked down at his hands, his shoulders sagging. I'm trying. I really am. And I'm here to help, I said, but we need to establish some ground rules. For starters, we need to keep our interactions appropriate and respectful. If something feels uncomfortable, we need to address it immediately. Okay, he said quietly. I'm also going to talk to your dad, I added, and his head snapped up, panic flashing in his eyes. No, please don't tell Dad, he pleaded. He'll think I'm some kind of creep. I don't want him to hate me too. Ryan, your dad loves you, and he's not going to think that, but he needs to be more involved in what's going on here. I've been handling so much on my own, and it's not fair to either of us. He hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. Okay. I don't want things to get worse. They won't, I promised. This is just a bump in the road. We'll get through it together as a family. The tension in the room eased slightly, and Ryan leaned back against the headboard, exhaling deeply. Thanks for not freaking out. I don't know what I'd do if you had. I gave him a small smile. We all make mistakes, Ryan. It's how we learn from them that matters. I stood to leave, pausing at the door. Good night, Ryan. And remember, you can always talk to me. Good night, he said, his voice soft. As I walked back to my room, a wave of exhaustion washed over me. The confrontation had been emotionally draining, but it felt necessary. I couldn't let this situation fester. It had to be addressed head-on, no matter how uncomfortable it was. In bed that night, I stared at the ceiling, my thoughts racing. I'd done my best to handle the situation with sensitivity and firmness, but I couldn't shake the feeling that things were far from resolved. The family dynamic had shifted, and it would take time to rebuild the trust and boundaries that had been tested. The days following our conversation were challenging. Ryan seemed more subdued, retreating to his room or leaving the house for long walks without explanation. I knew the confrontation had been difficult for him, but I also understood that it was necessary. This wasn't something we could sweep under the rug. It required time, care, and proactive steps to repair the fragile balance of our home. On the third evening, Mark called. The sound of his voice brought a wave of relief, though it was tinged with the usual undercurrent of distance. Hey, hun. How are things? How's Ryan? I hesitated, weighing how much to tell him. We're okay, I said carefully. But I think Ryan could use some more time with you. He's been a bit distant lately. Mark sighed heavily. Yeah, I figured. These trips have been piling up, but I'm hoping to cut back soon. Maybe we can do something as a family when I get back. That would be good, I said, trying to keep my tone neutral. I think he really needs that. The conversation turned to logistics, his return date, upcoming meetings, and the usual grind of work. As I hung up, I resolved to take matters into my own hands. Waiting for Mark to address the situation wasn't enough. I needed to act now, for both Ryan's sake and my own peace of mind. The next morning, I called a friend who worked as a counselor and explained the situation in the vaguest terms possible, framing it as a general parenting challenge in a blended family. What do you suggest? I asked, my voice low. Communication is key, she said gently. But it sounds like there's more going on here than just typical teenage awkwardness. It might be helpful for Ryan to talk to someone neutral, someone who can help him work through his emotions in a healthy way. Her suggestion lingered in my mind all day. How could I approach Ryan about therapy without making him feel cornered or judged? I knew he was sensitive about his feelings, and the last thing I wanted was to push him further away. I did that. That evening, over dinner, I decided to broach the subject delicately. "Ryan, I've been thinking about how things have been lately," I said, keeping my tone light. "I know you've been dealing with a lot, and I want to make sure you're okay." He looked up from his plate, his expression guarded. "I told you, I'm fine." "I know," I said, "but it's okay to need help sometimes. There's no shame in talking to someone about what you're feeling. It might even make things easier." He frowned, pushing his food around with his fork. "You mean like a therapist or something?" "Yes," I said, choosing my words carefully. "Just someone you can talk to without any pressure. It's not about fixing anything. It's about giving you a space to figure things out." He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Finally, he nodded slowly. "I'll think about it. That's all I'm asking," I said, relief flooding through me. "Take your time and let me know what you decide." The following week, I made an appointment for myself with a counselor to navigate my own feelings. Sitting across from her, I laid everything out: the growing tension with Ryan, Mark's absence, and my own struggle to maintain balance. "You're carrying a lot on your shoulders," she said, her voice kind but firm. "It's important to acknowledge that you can't do everything alone. Have you spoken to your husband about how you're feeling?" Then I shook my head. "He's so focused on work, I don't want to add to his stress." "Your feelings are just as important as his," she said. "You can't pour from an empty cup. If this family dynamic is going to heal, it has to start with open communication between you and your husband." Her words struck a chord. That evening, after Ryan had gone to bed, I called Mark again. This time, I didn't hold back. "Mark, we need to talk," I began, my voice trembling slightly. "Okay," he said, his tone concerned. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath and explained everything: Ryan's behavior, the tension in the house, and how isolated I'd been feeling. "I need you here," I said, my voice breaking. "Ryan needs you here. We can't keep doing this with you gone all the time." There was a long pause before he spoke. "I had no idea it was this bad," he admitted. "I'm sorry, honey. I've been so caught up in work that I didn't see what was happening. I'll talk to my boss about scaling back on these trips. I'll be home soon." His words brought a glimmer of hope. For the first time in months, I felt like we were on the same page. When Mark returned a few days later, he made an effort to spend more time with Ryan. They went to a basketball game together, something they hadn't done in years. Slowly, the atmosphere in the house began to shift. Ryan seemed lighter, less burdened, and more engaged. One evening, as I was tidying up the living room, Ryan approached me. "I've been thinking about what you said," he began, his voice steady. "About talking to someone. I think I'm ready to give it a try." His words filled me with a mix of relief and pride. "I'm really proud of you, Ryan," I said. "This is a big step, and it's going to help." In the weeks that followed, Ryan began therapy, and Mark became more present in our day-to-day lives. The distance that had grown between us began to close, and for the first time in a long while, the house felt like a home again. As the weeks passed, a sense of calm began to settle over the house. The tension that had once felt suffocating started to dissipate, replaced by a fragile but growing sense of normalcy. Ryan's decision to begin therapy was a pivotal moment, not just for him, but for all of us. It was a tangible step toward healing, and it gave me hope that we could rebuild what had been strained. I found myself reflecting often on the events of the past month: the incident with the Thong, the awkward encounters, and the heart-wrenching conversations had all been emotionally taxing. but they had also forced me to confront deeper truths about myself and my role in our family. I had been so focused on maintaining the appearance of a stable home that I hadn't realized how much I'd been neglecting my own needs. One afternoon, as I sat in my counselor's office, I finally voiced something I'd been reluctant to admit. I feel like I've been carrying this family on my own, I said, my voice trembling, and I don't know if I've been doing it right. She leaned forward, her expression empathetic. It's natural to feel that way, especially when you're in a blended family. The dynamics are more complex, and the boundaries can sometimes blur. But you've taken steps to address the issues, and that's what matters. I nodded, grateful for her reassurance, but still grappling with a lingering sense of guilt. I worry that I could have handled things better with Ryan, I admitted. That maybe I was too hard on him, or didn't give him enough space to figure things out. You did the best you could with the information you had, she said. And from what you've told me, you approached the situation with compassion and respect. That's all anyone can ask for. Her words stayed with me as I drove home. I couldn't change the past, but I could learn from it. And one of the most important lessons I'd learned was the necessity of setting boundaries. Not just for Ryan, but for myself as well. At home, I found Ryan in the living room watching a basketball game with Mark. The sight of them laughing together brought a lump to my throat. For so long, I had been the bridge between them, trying to keep the connection alive while Mark's work kept him away. But now, seeing them rebuild their relationship on their own terms, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Later that evening, as Ryan headed to his room, he paused in the hallway. "Hey, Mom?" he said, his voice hesitant. "Yes, Ryan?" I asked, turning to face him. "Thanks," he said simply, "for everything. I know I've been difficult lately, but I'm trying to do better." His words took me by surprise, and I felt a swell of emotion. "You're doing great, Ryan," I said, my voice soft. "And I'm really proud of you." He nodded and disappeared into his room, leaving me standing there with tears in my eyes. It was a small moment, but it meant everything. It was a sign that we were moving forward, even if it was just one step at a time. In the weeks that followed, I made a conscious effort to prioritize my own well-being. I started journaling again, a habit I had abandoned years ago, and I began carving out time for myself each day, whether it was reading a book, taking a walk, or simply sitting in silence. These small acts of self-care helped me feel more grounded and gave me the clarity to navigate the challenges of our family dynamic. Mark, true to his word, scaled back on his work trips and became more present at home. We started having family dinners again, a tradition that had fallen by the wayside during his long absences. The conversations around the table were light-hearted and sometimes awkward, but they were real. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like we were truly a family. One evening, as Mark and I sat on the porch after dinner, I decided to share my reflections with him. "I've been thinking a lot about everything that's happened," I said, staring out at the fading sunset, the moon's splendor filling the trees. He looked at me, concern flickering in his eyes. "Are you okay?" "I think I am," I said. "But it's been a wake-up call. For all of us." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I know I haven't been here as much as I should have, and I'm sorry for that. I didn't realize how much I was putting on you." "It's not just about you, Mark," I said gently. "It's about all of us. We've been running on autopilot, trying to keep everything together, but we weren't really connecting, and I think that's why things got so complicated. I felt the need to settle this once and for all." He reached for my hand, his grip warm and reassuring. "We'll do better," he said, "together." Those words felt like a promise, not just between us, but for our family as a whole, and in that moment I believed him. As Ryan continued his therapy, I noticed subtle but meaningful changes in him. He seemed more confident, more comfortable in his own skin. He still had moments of awkwardness, but they were fewer and farther between. And while our interactions were still cautious, they were no longer weighed down by the tension that had once defined them. One evening, as I was preparing dinner, Ryan walked into the kitchen and offered to help. It was a small gesture, but it felt significant. We worked side by side in comfortable silence, and for the first time in weeks, I felt at ease. When Mark joined us at the table, the three of us shared a meal that felt unremarkable in the best possible way. There were no unspoken tensions, no lingering shadows. Just a family coming together, piece by piece. It was a crisp Saturday morning, the kind of day that begged for a fresh start. Mark suggested a family outing, something we hadn't done in far too long. We decided on a hike in a nearby nature reserve, a place Ryan used to love when he was younger. As we packed water bottles and snacks, I felt a flicker of hope that this day could mark a turning point for all of us. The trail was quiet, the sound of leaves crunching underfoot and birdsong filling the gaps in our conversation. Mark and Ryan walked ahead, their laughter carrying back to me as they joked about something trivial. I watched them, feeling a warmth spread through me. This was what I'd been longing for: connection, ease, and a sense of unity. We stopped at a clearing with a breathtaking view of the valley below. Ryan pulled out his phone to take pictures, but then surprised me by handing it to Mark. "Let's get one of all of us," he said, gesturing for me to join them. I stood between them, Mark's arm draped over my shoulder and Ryan standing tall beside me. The camera clicked, capturing a moment that felt almost too perfect to be real. It wasn't just a photo. It was a symbol of how far we had come, a reminder that even the most fractured families could find their way back to wholeness. As we continued the hike, Ryan fell into step beside me. "You know," he began, his tone casual but sincere, "this feels really nice. Like how things are supposed to be." I glanced at him, my heart swelling with pride. "It does," I agreed, "and I'm really glad you're a part of it, Ryan." He smiled, a genuine, unguarded expression that I hadn't seen in a long time. "Thanks, Mom," he said softly. The words struck me, filling me with a mix of surprise and emotion. He had called me Mom before, but this time it felt different, less obligatory and more heartfelt. It was a moment I knew I would treasure forever. When we returned home that afternoon, tired but content, I felt a deep sense of peace. The road to this point had been anything but smooth, but we had made it. Through uncomfortable conversations, quiet reflections, and a collective effort to rebuild, we had found our way back to each other. That night, as I lay in bed beside Mark, I thought about the journey we had been on. It wasn't perfect, and there would undoubtedly be more challenges ahead. But for now, we were stronger, closer, and more connected than ever. Families aren't defined by perfection. They're defined by resilience, love, and the willingness to grow together. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt a profound gratitude for the family we had become. And later, my family grew, becoming something more than whatever we started. As I sit here, Reflecting on everything that has unfolded over the past few months, I'm struck by how much life has changed. What began as a period of uncertainty, tension, and emotional upheaval has transformed into something far deeper, a renewed understanding of what it means to be part of a family. Our family isn't perfect. We've stumbled, struggled, and sometimes even hurt each other in ways that were hard to acknowledge. But in those struggles, we found clarity. We found the courage to face the uncomfortable truths, to have difficult conversations, and to lean on one another in ways we hadn't before. Ryan has come such a long way. Watching him grow has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my life. His decision to seek therapy showed a level of maturity that I didn't fully expect, but that filled me with immense pride. Through his sessions, he's learning to navigate the complexities of his emotions, and I've seen a shift in him, a lightness that wasn't there before. And Mark, my husband, my partner, for so long I carried the weight of this family on my own, but now I feel like we're truly sharing that responsibility. His willingness to step back from work and prioritize us has brought us closer than ever. Our late-night talks, our quiet moments together, and his newfound presence in Ryan's life have reminded me why I fell in love with him in the first place. As for me, I've learned to value myself in a way I hadn't before. The self-reflection, the therapy sessions, and the moments of solitude have taught me that it's okay to prioritize my own needs. Taking care of myself doesn't mean neglecting my family. It means giving them the best version of me. There will always be challenges. That's the nature of life, especially in a blended family. But I feel more equipped now to handle them, knowing that we've laid a foundation of honesty, respect, and love. Sitting on the porch this evening with the warm glow of the setting sun casting long shadows across the yard, I feel a sense of peace I haven't felt in a long time. Ryan is laughing with a friend in the driveway, and Mark is inside, humming softly as he prepares dinner. The sounds of life fill the air, and I'm reminded that even in our imperfections, there is beauty. Farewells are never easy, but they're often necessary. They mark the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. And while this part of our journey is coming to a close, I know it's only a stepping stone towards something even greater. As I take one last look at the horizon, I feel grateful, not just for the good moments, but for the struggles that brought us here. Because in those moments, we became who we are today, a family, strong and resilient, ready to face whatever comes next together. And with that, I say goodbye, not just to this chapter, but to the person I was before it all began. Here's to new beginnings.